Hey, welcome to XDS21 Adapt. My name is Victor Lucas, and I'm from an outlet called the Electric Playground, and it is my sincere honor to be back with you and every participant, every speaker that's going to be a part of this wonderful week here at XDS. I always have a great time at the External Development Summit, and it's great to be back with you. I want to welcome everybody from every time zone that is tuning in to watch us, because this event reaches people all over the globe, and it's so exciting to hear from people all over the globe. All right, shortly we're going to be dropping fantastic content for you, including Dave Sanderson's talk on the buyer mindset, how to level up your sales by thinking like a developer, and Sam Carlisle's presentation on external supplier crunch, origins, impact, and solutions guidance. So watch out for both of those, and stick around for our welcome and opening remarks, followed by our keynote fireside chat with Samantha Ryan of Electronic Arts. Can't wait for that. Now, have a great day, everybody.
Hello, XDS. My name is John Campbell, and I'm the lead producer of external development at BioWare, as well as a member of the XDS Advisory Committee. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the next speaker. Dave Sanderson is the external development manager at Phoenix Labs, the maker of multiplayer phenomenon Dauntless. Now, we all know why we're here at XDS. This is the premier opportunity for service providers to connect with potential buyers of their services. Dave's presentation is called The Buyer Mindset, How to Level Up Your Sales by Thinking Like a Developer. It's a series of practical tips to ensure that your company is top of mind when your potential customer decides they need your particular services. I've known Dave for many years in his roles first as a vendor, and then as a buyer, and of course as a member of the XDS Advisory Committee as well. Thank you, Dave, for your time, effort, and expertise on this important topic. Take it away, Dave.
Thanks, JC. Thank you for the very kind introduction. And yeah, my name is Dave Sanderson. I am the External Development Manager. That's a tough one to say. I am the External Development Manager at Phoenix Labs. And this is the buyer mindset and how you can level up your sales by thinking like a developer. So just a quick overview. I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. So please do, if there's anything that I say that you'd like to learn more about, feel free to ask questions at the end, or, on the chance that we get to meet up this week, I'd love to answer those questions then too. I'm going to talk through a little bit about the purpose of XDS as I see it, how the external development process actually works, how you can do a better job of thinking like a buyer, and then, we'll get into the Q&A. So here's the thing. Last year, I did a talk that was very similar to this one, and I wasn't actually sure that I would do it again. But after reflecting on the events of the last year and for having some conversations with a few different folks at the XDS committee, there's a few reasons why I thought it would be valuable to do it again. And I'm going to get into those in just a second. But before I do want to give a final thank you, not only to JC for his help in me putting this together this year, but also to Dave Lamb, who was instrumental in putting it together last year, and to Chris Wren and the entire XDS Advisory Committee for making this happen. And for this opportunity to chat to you all today. All right, let's get into it. I have a bit of an unusual relationship with XDS. I am a bit of a special snowflake in that I have worked both in a sales role at service providers and as a buyer of services on the developer side. So before joining Phoenix Labs, I worked at a company called Goldtooth Creative that makes trailers and cinematics and other video content for games. And I loved XDS. It was a huge opportunity for us every year to meet new customers. And actually, my first day on the job at that company was the day that the XDS studio crawl came through, back when we still did things in person. And then in 2018, I made the jump over to the buyer side, over to the developer side of things. And I've been there ever since. And ever since joining Phoenix Labs and spending more time with my peers on the buyer side of things, I am constantly struck by a feeling that, man, I wish I had understood this stuff better when I was on the seller side of things. And so that's why I wanted to give this talk, was to really help pass that information on. And that was the original motivation. However, there's also another important reason why I wanted to give the talk a second time, and that's COVID-19. So COVID has changed the way we work. Everybody in every industry, but certainly external development and how we interact with our partners in games. But more importantly, over the next few days, and for the folks that are watching this talk, COVID has changed how developers and service providers connect. COVID brought together a number of different factors that maybe wanted to revisit this idea of how we get good at XDS. It's a virtual conference, so it is open to a lot more people in a lot more places around the world. It used to be that if you couldn't come to Vancouver, you couldn't participate. Well, that's now changed. And attendance is way up, which is great. And primarily from new service providers. So I think there's a lot of folks who maybe aren't familiar with how this kind of conference actually operates. And so it's important to me that, that everybody has a chance to do well. And finally, this is the chance to establish trust between service providers and developers. And this is the best opportunity that a lot of service providers are going to have throughout the entire year to make those new connections. But there is a problem. XDS traditionally looks like this. In-person meetings. And we actually know from survey data that's been collected that in-person meetings are the #1 driver of new business relationships for service providers. And that bears repeating. Before COVID, this kind of interaction that you're seeing there, that was the single most important way that service providers found new customers. They won new business. And these meetings are, to me, just the definition of what XDS is all about. Both when I was a service provider and as a developer, this is what it's all about. But now we've gone from those in-person meetings to this. It's a lot of work from home. And I don't think we should gloss over the fact that that's not all bad. By working from home, we have made this conference and these types of meetings open to more people around the world. And I really do think that there is a benefit to seeing people in their homes, in their natural habitat, as it were. It really helps remind us that this is another human being on the other side of the screen. When you see somebody's kids come through, or you see their cat or whatever, it's a solid reminder that this is just a bunch of human beings are trying to do a really hard thing together. And I appreciate that. But there's no getting around the fact that it makes sales, it makes business development harder. And this is going to be the format for XDS this year. This is exactly what's going to be happening. So the question becomes, how do we get as much out of this, what you're seeing, as we do out of this? And here's the honest answer. I don't know. No one is. But we are still very much in unprecedented times when it comes to business development in our industry. However, I do know that the meetings you're going to have over the course of this conference represent a huge opportunity. And I also know that a lot of XDS meetings fail to form strong partnerships for reasons that are easy to prevent. I promise you that I and every other buyer here wants you to succeed. We want to connect with great partners. We want to understand you. We want to see the best, most authentic presentation of what you have to offer. And I also want to be super clear. This talk is not about how to sell your services. You are the expert in what your company does. This talk is about how sellers often fail simply because they don't understand the buyer perspective. So let's fix that. And let's start by asking a simple question. What is the purpose of meetings at XDS? Right? Selling your services, right? Well, that is an answer. It's not a bad answer either. But if that's all you're thinking about, you're not getting the most out of XDS. And the problem with this answer is it is only from the seller's perspective. I believe that the purpose of meetings at XDS is to build trust through mutual understanding. And the reason why I believe that is the substance of this talk. So let's play a little game. Just you and me, person sitting at home. Raise your hand if you are responsible for sales, if we're generating the revenue that your company needs to grow and to thrive. And I'm guessing there's a lot of folks have their hands up. That's probably the target market of this talk. Now, raise your hand again if you think you have a really thorough understanding of how external development decisions get made inside development studios. And I'm guessing that there are fewer people with their hands up. And we should take a second to think about how crazy that is, that you are responsible for the outcome of a process that you don't fully understand. So let's fix that. How does the external development process actually work? Okay, so now this is the studio perspective. This is what it looks like from inside of a development studio. And yes, every studio is different. Yes, every studio has its own unique values and own unique things that it considers important. But broad strokes, this is consistent across the industry. And it begins with a problem. There is a problem that needs to get solved. And we had the question of how are we going to solve it? And one of those things is, are we going to solve it internally or are we going to start externally? How are we going to solve the problem? And that could be reallocating staff that we currently have. It could mean acquiring another company, or it could mean going out to bids or RFPs to work with an external partner. And so the question becomes, who are the service providers that could do the work? What are our options across the board? How many options are there of people that could actually do this work? And then you actually go out and you engage those vendors. You go out with RFPs, or you do outreach, or you even go back to people that have contacted you in the past. And this is where a lot of you salespeople enter the process, right? The thing to note here is how late this is in the process, right? Look at how much has already happened by the time RFPs go out, or the call for bids. And the final part of this is, of course, the selecting of vendors. They choose a particular service provider. And at this point, the process shifts over into contracts and onboarding and the business of actually doing the work. So what is the goal of this process from the studio perspective? And quite simply, it's to solve the problem in a way that's consistent with their values. And it is worth calling out that piece, the way that's consistent with their values, because different studios will value different things. There's no such thing as a bad service provider or a bad developer per se. It's about fit. Are they the right fit for a particular need? So there are some studios that do a fabulous job of providing 3D assets to primarily mobile games, or as opposed to primarily console games. And if you mismatch those things, it can go really badly. It's not consistent with what the needs of the studio are, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad developer or a bad service provider. Okay, so looking at this development process, let's just take a few things to notice. First of all, most of this is invisible to service providers. You don't have, and you likely won't ever have, access to most of this process. What that means is most of the projects that you don't win, most of the sales revenue that you don't get, is from projects that you never knew existed in the first place. Second thing to note is that this is only one perspective. There is more than one way to look at this process. There's more than one way to look at what's happening here. And everything I'm about to talk about, everything that I'm going to say, every conclusion I'm going to reach is kind of locked behind that one fundamental concept of empathy, of your ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, your ability to use somebody else's mindset, the ability to see things differently. Okay, so let's compare this process from the studio perspective to the service provider perspective. So the same types of things are happening. The same process is happening. As a service provider, you can know that this process is taking place, and you can make educated guesses about what's going on. For example, if a studio has a successful box product launch, maybe you would guess that they're going to start prioritizing work on new DLC, for example. That's a pretty educated guess. But you can't know. There's a ton of uncertainty around the service provider side of this, because you simply don't have access to those internal discussions. You don't have all the information. And again, there is this internal versus external question. You're asking yourself, how is this studio going to answer the question of how to solve the problem? But again, that's an invisible component for you. And if you're getting involved in the shortlisted stage, if you're getting involved in do they think we're a good fit, well, that's a good place to be for a lot of service providers. That's about raising your profile. That's about making sure that when someone has a problem, they know to call you. Getting involved here, a lot of salespeople spend a lot of time here. And then, of course, this stage, how do we prove that we're the best fit for a job? That's pitching or bidding. I mean, this is super familiar to most of the folks who are on this call or on this talk. And then the final point is, of course, the selecting of a partner. And this is where you celebrate. the deal is signed, the work begins. Congratulations, you did it. The goal of this process from the service provider side is that when a developer has a problem, they choose you to solve it. So there's a few takeaways from this. You as a salesperson are responsible for the outcome of this process, but you have very little control over the process. The next thing to notice really is that the later you get involved, kind of the further right you are in this process, the later you come in the chain, the harder your job becomes. If you run into people that get shortlisted, great. You're doing a good job. But if you have a deep and trusted partnership with a client or with another development studio, you can actually move earlier on. If I as a external development manager know that we have a really excellent partner available to us, that's going to influence my decision of whether or not to go internal versus external. And in fact, there are people that we've been working with for years that they can come to us and say, hey, we know your studio, we know your product so well, we have identified this problem that you have that maybe isn't one of your priorities yet, but we can see it and we can fix it. And here's how we would do it. And based on the trust there, that would be really meaningful to us, and it certainly would be meaningful from a sales perspective for that service provider. And the bottom line is you want to move left. You want the developer to involve you earlier. So that's the key thing here. Is like you want to be involved earlier in the process. But how? And the single most important factor here is that trust. Yes, skill set matters. You have to be able to actually do the work. But at every stage, trust trumps everything. And to understand why that is, we're going to look at this perspective just one more time from the perspective of the external development team. So I apologize. Let me repeat that. We're going to look at this one more time from the external development team's perspective. And looking at it from that perspective is going to tell you why all of these things matter the way they do. And to be clear, what we're going to talk about now is the perspective of the people that you're going to be meeting with over the next few days. So again, it's similar, but not identical to the studio perspective. It's what problem have I been asked to solve? The entire job of the external development team is to connect their fellow developers with good options to solve their problems. We are in the business of vouching for other service providers. And then, of course, there is this internal versus external question. How are we going to solve the problem? And then there's the short listing. But in this case, it's actually which service providers do I trust to do the work? Not just who do I know about, not just who has done before, but who do I trust to do the work? And note the amount of trust required scales with the stakes of the project. More important the project, more trust required. This also means it's worth knowing that external development people have a lot personally at stake for in these decisions. So the people you're meeting here at XDS, they have like their own sort of career skin in the game when these decisions come up. If they choose to go work with you, that reflects on them as well, not just on you. And then there's the engaged vendors. So which service providers do we think is the best fit? And then ultimately, let's bet on service provider X to solve the problem. And the use of the word bet here is not an accident. There is uncertainty for external development teams. There is uncertainty about will the job get done right, on time, all those things. And uncertainty that it is our job to minimize. The more critical the project is to the success of the game, the less uncertainty, the less risk we can reasonably tolerate. So our goal is to connect my team, my development team, with the best option for solving their problem. So this external development perspective, even more so than the studio perspective, is what matters to you when you're trying to level up your pitch and when you're speaking with people here at XDS in the next few days. Okay, but why is that? You as a service provider don't just need customers. You need advocates. You need someone who's going to speak for you in those meetings that you cannot be a part of. In that early process of identifying need of whether we go internal or external, you can't be in those rooms. You can't be in those calls. But if you have an advocate in an external development manager, they can speak for you. They're actually taking on that role of building a partnership or maybe essentially winning those sales for you. So you want someone who's going to involve you earlier. And knowing that this how it works, knowing now that this is the process, should change the way you think about meetings at XDS. Okay, so this is what if you walk with one thing from this talk, this is what it is. You are recruiting, not selling. When you meet people here, you are not selling your services. You are trying to recruit those people to become your advocates. Your goal should be to turn your customers into people that want to work with you, that want to speak on your behalf inside of their studios. And that begins with empathy. That begins with your ability to see things from the developer perspective. And this is something you can practice. Just practice thinking like a developer. Practice thinking like, what is it that they are going to want? What is it that is going to be relevant to them? And you could ask, like if you want to find out the answers to these questions, it's not magic. You can actually just talk to the person and find out what is it that most matters to them and practice looking at it from their perspective. You need to know more than what's just important to you. You need to know what's important to them as well. And that empathy leads to a better understanding. It's an accurate understanding of their needs, but also your worth, your value to those needs. And if you can build that understanding, that builds trust. Empathy allows understanding. Understanding is what builds trust. And trust is what leads to and strengthens partnerships. So the goal of recruiting, not selling at XDS is simply to turn customers into advocates. So with all that context, how exactly does one level up their pitch to XDS? How actually does one get better? Well, let's talk about a couple of practical tips. First of all, ask yourself, why am I at this meeting? Why do you want to have this meeting in the first place? Why are you a good fit? Your goal should be that like every developer leaves your meeting able and eager to advocate on your behalf. So ask yourself, like, what's your story? When developers talk about you tomorrow or a month from now or a year from now, what is it that you want them to say? Because remember, it is extremely unlikely that the people that you meet with over the next few days need what you're selling now. If you've done your homework, it's plausible that they're going to need what you're selling eventually. So you want to make sure that they are walking away from that meeting with the ability to tell a story that you want them to tell. So, and you want to show an understanding of the problem that you solve and why it's relevant to that meeting. Showing up and saying, we are excellent at X thing. This is our specialty. This is the kind of problem you solve. So when you, developer, have that problem, you should think of us. And you should show some understanding of why it's relevant to that developer. You should understand if you are great at like super quick turnaround mobile assets and you're talking to somebody who specializes in console development, you've fundamentally missed the problem set that person has, right? Like you want to make sure you understand what kind of problem you solve. And also remember that building trust isn't just transactional. It's not just about money or services. It's personal. Who are you? What's your story? Like, show them why you would be a good person to work with. Show them, why you're a good fit culturally. And also remember that in games development and in external development, quality, delivering on time, and reasonable price are table stakes. Everybody has to offer that at minimum. So don't present those as perks. Like I sure hope that you deliver on time. I sure hope that you charge an acceptable price. I sure hope that you are going to do a good job. What else? What are you delivering on top of that? And finally, just demonstrating that you understand why your services are of value to the person you're meeting with is the first step in establishing trust. Like asking, why am I here at this meeting? Okay. Also, don't forget to ask, why are we here at this meeting? We being you, the service provider, me, the developer. Set some context for the meeting. Remind them about the meeting request you sent or the previous conversation. Remind them of like, how did we get here? Setting that context it's not only helpful, it's also just really polite. It's important to remember that while perhaps you are pitching some version of your services the same way over and over and over again over the course of the next few days, the people you're meeting with are context shifting like crazy. They're jumping from localization to 3D assets to cinematics to live services. And so the ability for the person that you sit down with to just take a moment to set some context and say, this is why we're here, is a huge benefit. And it's also the kind of thing that demonstrates that you're somebody you want to work with, that you're really paying attention. All right. So all of that said, So far, you've really kind of only heard my perspective, and I don't want to create the impression that the things that I'm saying are just like David Sanderson's brain broadcast of the world. Um, Over the last couple of years, I have asked dozens of other external development managers the following two questions. The first is, in your experience, what is one thing that service providers don't understand that you wish they did understand? And then, when you think about the best meetings you've had at XDS, what is it that made them so good? All right, so let's take the what makes an XDS meeting good. First of all, be prepared. Clearly understand the problem you solve and why it's relevant to this particular developer. So this is just do your homework. And I know this sounds really basic. You would be shocked at how many people arrive in those meetings and have never heard of the developer or don't know what games or what kind of games they make. So be prepared for that meeting. Be honest. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. If you say that you solve every problem or ask an XDev manager, like, what are your problems? We can solve all those things. That erodes trust. That immediately raises red flags because the fact of the matter is you don't solve every problem equally well. What are you best at? Like, let's find the right fit. Be direct. So XDS meetings are quite short, and so while it's important to have a rapport and be pleasant and let the conversation flow. We want to make the most of the time that we have. So let's not ramble too far off the purpose of being here. Make sure you listen. Be ready to adjust your pitch based on the needs discussed. And if it turns out that the thing that you do is just not a good fit for the person you're meeting with, or if they don't have that need, for 5+ years, that's okay. Maybe use the time to ask them who else they should be speaking with, or if you have other questions that you would hope to gather from that person. It's okay if this doesn't lead directly to sales. Listen to what's going on and react like a human being. And finally, be genuine. We're all just people trying to make games. It's all just individuals. And the more that you can be an actual individual and not sort of a robotic pitching machine, the better off you'll be, and the more memorable you'll be as well. And then, what do you wish service providers understood? Okay, well, the first is don't oversell. Know what you're good at. Don't say you're good at everything. You're not, right? So be honest, be direct. That in itself directly builds trust. It's just being straightforward and not trying to oversell yourselves that you're perfect in every way. Also, do your research. Again, know who you're talking to and why. Be selective about your meetings. Don't just spam everybody at XDS with meeting requests. We are all forced to be selective in who we meet with. There are more people to meet with than there is time. So please do target the folks that you talk to make the most of their time and of yours. Make sure you communicate clearly. So put some thought into the story that you want to tell and really get it out there in as concise and clear a manner as possible. Remember to play the long game. These are relationships that take months or years to develop, and embrace that. You are not going to sign a contract at the end of this meeting. What you're going to do is try and make a good impression, and you're going to try and recruit an advocate for yourself. And that's okay. Like all your a success state is simply another meeting, another friendly meeting, right? And then lastly, passion counts. Making video games is really, really hard. And so why wouldn't you want to work with people that inspire you, that people who are also excited to be here making those games? So these are the answers that I have received over and over and over again. There's kind of two big takeaways from this. The first of all is that this is all good advice. You should totally do all of these things. But the second is that there's no secrets here, right? Like this is people at AAA companies to mobile developers, small companies, huge companies. There's things they consistently point to. And so this is a broad swath of the industry, and all they want is to be understood. All they want is for the partners that we work with to put themselves in our shoes and try and think like a developer. So to sum up, when you want to level up your pitch, seek to understand, build trust with those people, recruit advocates, and form lasting partnerships. This is the key to being successful at XDS, in my opinion. And also, one more thing, try to have some fun while you're doing it. That's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention. and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.